So supply chain has been in the news a lot lately throughout the pandemic, and it seems that it's always been presented in one of two ways. One being that it's the scapegoat, that when all else fails, blame supply chain.
Yeah.
Or it's something like the weather, like you can't control it. Like, oh well, that's supply chain. We can't do anything about it. And that's not true. So talk to me about what the difference is between the companies that have figured out supply chain and those that haven't.
Well, first of all, thanks again, Nicole, for having me on. The supply chain is one of those kind of nebulous. It's kind of like air. How do you describe air? You could describe it very molecular. You could describe it, in a broader context that every living thing needs air. So supply chain is similar that way, in that it depends on how you define supply chain. It traditionally supply chain was always warehousing and distribution and delivery. So if you look at the leading people in that field, in that industry, the Federal Express, the UPS, before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now as the pandemic starts to ease somewhat globally, they've knocked it out of the park. They continue to knock it out of the park. They've done a good blend of technology, of resourcing, of the people they hire, the equipment they use, how they use it, where they use it. They've just clearly knocked it totally out of the park, because I think without people like them and organizations like them, with the kind of things and tools they use and the people they hire and how they utilize all of it, it would have made the pandemic a whole lot more difficult and impossible for many people. Now, having said that, that's a narrowly defined view of what supply chain is. Supply chain, as you know, Nicole, has been defined a whole lot of ways, but people are starting to, and have been for maybe the last decade or so, defined it much more broadly, meaning it's sourcing, it's product development, it's product design, it's customer service, it's warehouse distribution, all those traditional things. So it's a lot bigger than just distribution and delivery. So I think through the pandemic, some of the people, you can pick industries, certain industries have done it probably better than others. We were all clearly affected, but it really goes down to some real basic facts about supply chain. It's about sourcing and customers. And there's always been a dilemma of, do you get your supply chain built in such a way that you're closer to your source materials, so as you can have it delivered to your manufacturing facilities or your processing plants to get it faster, cheaper, or do you get it closer to your customers where you can actually just deliver it faster, cheaper, and more expeditiously to those customers with fewer service outages? So the dilemma still exists today. The next level of supply chain, the pandemic has just raised this to a whole different way of looking at traditional supply chain strategy, of its implementation, how it's viewed, why it's viewed the way it is. So this notion of stay local, both in sourcing and customers, clearly is ideal. I mean, if you could have a plant and a material source in every geographic location in the world, wow, it would be perfect. Well, we know that's not true. So what have people actually done? The leading contenders have tried to, I don't say roll with this pandemic, but kind of get their sea legs as to, well, what really is the optimum level of being close to sourcing and being close to customers? Because in either case, a mismatch can actually cause, obviously, disconnect and dysfunction in what we would say supply chain. Again, as you said at the outset, supply chain gets blamed for everything because it's an easy target, when in reality, there's all these little microcosm functions or operations that make up this large entity called supply chain. And that's where people get angst and they just blame supply chain. It's kind of like blaming air. It's a cloudy day, so it must be the air. And so it's kind of hard to put your finger on it. But the ones that are really doing it, if you look at some that are let's just say, customer driven, things like retail. A lot of the retailers, I mean, I can name a couple of them just in you look at somebody like Kohl's, they've figured out how to get alternative products directly to their customers, curbside delivery, in-house, in-store delivery, at-home delivery. And it used to be, I mean, you know, and anyone who is shopped online knows sometimes you can find things online you can't find in the store. Well, a lot of these major retailers, not all of them, but some of them, like Kohl's, have figured out maybe because people are sitting at home and they have a lot of time on their hands, why don't we make more of our product selections available online rather than in the store since our traffic was down? And I think it was smart. I mean, again, you say this is smart supply chain. This is saying we've got limited product. We can offer alternative products in some cases. How do we get that to our customers faster, cheaper, better, and so on? And they've figured out using technology, using direct technology with the internet, that they can actually address some of the shortfalls of supply chain. Because here's the other thing that always gets me is that people, when they say, well, supply chain is broken, well, the supply chain isn't broken, meaning the technology never failed, the distribution network never failed, the people working it never failed. What failed was the whole global interaction and you know, this whole dilemma of sourcing and customers. Where do you source? Where do you find it? And then with all regulations and pandemic and healthcare and public health caused the dysfunction, not the supply chain. So the one thing that's interesting though about all of this concept is a lot of major retailers have figured out there's this notion of called reverse logistics, and that is returns and refunds. And most of us have probably countless stories of how things never worked. The thing didn't work. I had to take it back. It was a problem taking it back. I couldn't get my credit. I couldn't blah, blah, blah. Well, the major retailers and the people that are figuring out logistics have finally realized that some of the smartest logistics is reverse logistics. In some of the major retailers, you know, where you couldn't try on clothes, they say, no problem. Take it home with you, return it, it'll be easy. And sure enough, it's pretty easy. So people are getting pretty used to going, wow, this doesn't work. I can just take it back. Or if it doesn't fit, I don't like the color, I don't like the size, I don't like the style, just take it all back. So there's a lot of these major retailers that are figuring this out, I think really well for the long haul. Because the question, what do they do in the future? Do they go back to the old normal? Maybe yes, maybe no. Most likely it'll be a complete blend, because a lot of the people who either have been able to work from home, work remotely, kind of like it. They like being able to get their cup of coffee and bring it into their home office. And while, yeah, it's true, the dog barks, but we've all been through that. They know people have kind of like adjusted and to the new normal. So supply chain, again, I think is in a dynamic stage. I think the ones that have figured it out that'll be continued success are the ones that figure out this balance. But the balance question is never going away. And that's where it's not as if you can decide that you're going to build a facility in, I don't know, pick a place, Malaysia or Vietnam or China or Japan or in Atlanta or Chicago. It's really about, well, what are your customer dynamics? I mean, it's always been that way. Supply chain's always been, that's how you get to the correct answer. But I think now more than ever, the real astute companies, whether they're in avionics, whether they're in healthcare, are looking at all that dynamics and putting good a mental process to their data and going, okay, what makes sense for all of it? And I think as a result of that, I think you're going to see a much stronger supply chain. Not that it was weak in the first place, but it'll be a different kind of supply chain than I think we all experienced to date.
And do you think that the pandemic was actually a huge blessing for some companies in that it forced them to think more creatively about how they provide services and products to customers? And that even if things do go back to normal, or what we think of as normal, that they can still use these ideas to reach customers in a better or more efficient, more successful way. Do you
Yeah,
think that some of the lessons learned aren't just for during pandemic times, that you can keep doing what they've created during the pandemic and keep using it in the future, regardless of how back to normal things get.
Yeah, I think what to your point, Nicole, which is a good one. I think the pandemic just scared the living daylights out of everyone, and especially those companies that were maybe not as nimble as they should have been, or didn't take seriously this whole notion of customer driven sales or innovation in sales, innovation just generally. A lot of companies, I think, said, "Oh my God, the pandemic's going to kill us." Well, no, what's going to kill them is them. I mean, look in the mirror and see what you see. And a lot of times, yeah, I think it was frightening for companies, whether it didn't matter if they were in retail, in consumer, if they were in B2B, didn't really matter what industry, and even the globalization nature. It didn't really matter. But if they were broken before and ignored it, now they had no choice but had to look inside and go, okay, what are we gonna do? And so on the end, I think the ones that'll be successful, a month, 2 months, 2 years, 10 years from now are the ones that not just look at this as episodic, but will look at pandemic as another eye opener. Go, we need to look at constant strategy, constant flow, constant customer evaluation, constant product evaluation. Because here's the other thing that's interesting. If you go through any retail establishment, and it could be a home improvement, could be a grocery store, could be anything, look on the shelves and see what's there and what's not there. And that'll give you a good kind of like guide to the question you were asking, I mean, not for nothing, you can go to any store now and you see rows and rows of toilet paper. And you go, what happened? Well, they like overreacted to what the market was telling them or thought that was telling them. And as a result of that pandemic scare of toilet paper, now there's more toilet paper than probably potato chips. I mean, it's just
Yeah,
crazy.
I've heard the stores are giving away hand sanitizer for free.
Right, right. And a year ago, people were killing each other, getting down the aisles, trying to grab bottles and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think that the pandemic for organizations is certainly, I think, forced them, and that forced all of them, any size, any category, any market, to reevaluate how they build their business strategy short and long term, and then how do they effectively use things like supply chain to actually to implement their strategy to the customer.
And I wanted to ask you, so you mentioned that supply chain is considered, or traditionally it was considered a lot more narrow than it is now, or by some companies. So when it comes to customer experience, the organizations that seem, or that do better, are the ones that see customer experience as something that permeates throughout an organization, that it's not just the marketing department. It's really every single business decision, every single action, every single interaction. So does that work the same way with supply chain, where it sort of is the glue that holds the organization together?
Well, it's always an interesting dilemma, the yin and yang here. I would contend that it's the people that are the glue to the organization and how they view the supply chain. Meaning this, there's countless examples of companies that use supply chain to appear to be the glue in the organization, but it's not. It's really the people that are using the tools in supply chain that actually create the glue that make it work. And I'm saying this because I've seen, especially in the consulting practice, now a lot of companies just want to throw technology. Oh my God, we have people working from home, so we need to get this, that. And not that in and of itself is wrong, but the strategy is wrong, because now all they're doing is throwing good technology on a questionable process or questionable strategy, and it'll fail every time, rather than looking at what the business strategy is and then applying the appropriate technology to that. And then to your question, that becomes the glue that keeps it all together, because now you've got a blend of good people skills, good technology, great strategy holding it together, and then they move on from there.
So it's more a supply chain mindset rather than the technology. It's people and the tools together.
Yeah, great way to describe it. I couldn't say it better myself. And that becomes the way of the world for a company. And again, you don't have to look very far, Nicole. You can look at UPS. UPS just does what they do, and they do it well every single time, everywhere around the world. And you go, well, wow, how can someone like that do this and everyone else can't? Because you go, people look at it and go, well, it's really simple. All they do is just deliver stuff. Well, it's much more complicated than that, as you would imagine, as you've said. And so it's because the mindset, it's the people in the brown uniforms that deliver stuff that always are, they're always being challenged, they're always working, they're always asking, why can't we do this better? How do we do it better? And that's what makes successful organizations use supply chain.
So very much like customer experience, where if an organization approaches it holistically,
Yep.
the difference can be noticed by the customers. Is that the same thing with supply chain, where if an organization looks at supply chain more broadly rather than what you were saying with the traditional narrow view of it, is that noticeable to customers?
I don't know. That's a good question. Again, the last year we've heard, like you said at the outset of our chat, the supply chain has been blamed for everything. Supply chain is broken. It doesn't work. Well, if supply chain was truly broken, we wouldn't have had anything. And it was really supply chain that actually, I don't want to say saved many companies and many organizations, but it was without the supply chain, the way it was set up or is set up, we would have many more failures. Because again, you had technology and you could do a lot of things differently now than you could before. So I think that again, it's like supply chain has become the whipping post for everything that goes wrong anywhere. Sometimes it's warranted, there's no doubt about it. You go to Home Depot or some box store and you can't find the screwdriver you're looking for. Oh, supply chain is broken. Well, it really is not the supply chain. It's because the person making the thing had to lay off 5 people, 10 people. I don't know. There's a whole lot of things.
Or
So
just didn't order the inventory.
they order the right stuff, right? Yeah. So categorically, you could say, yeah, it's supply chain. But if you ask the individual consumer, and again, I'm going back to your question, which is down straight, is like, it's really about getting the product to a customer on time, undamaged, at the right price, at the right transaction cost. And as long as that happens, it's working.
So it's sort of like a performance at a theater where there's all this work going on behind the scenes. And if you do your job right behind the scenes, the audience never notices.
That's right. That's
So
right.
the less that the audience notices, the better a job you're doing.
Yeah. And so this whole notion of how do you make supply chain work? Again, we go back to what we just talked about 5 minutes ago, and that was, it's about doing the right analysis up front for an organization to build the correct strategy around all of that. And then, like you said, the rest of it will kind of work and all the players will know what to do. The pieces will work, the flow will be there. And you go, I mean, it's amazing when you see some of these automated warehouses, Nicole, that is pure supply chain. There are very few human touch points. And when it works, it's amazing how fast these cases can come shooting up the conveyors and they know where they're going. But all you need is one mechanical problem, the bearing blows, the conveyor breaks, all havoc is there. And then you say, wow, supply chain is broken. Well, it's really not. It's really that one bearing on the conveyor line snap, and that's what caused the backlog of everything else.
So the organizations that have really struggled for the past year with supply chain, what would you say to them? I mean, beyond having your customer right next to your warehouse or whatever it is, right? Besides being able to set up a perfect situation, what would you say to most organizations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. This was even pre-pandemic. We always counseled our clients to stay close to policy and policymakers, no matter what geographic jurisdiction they might be in the world. because that'll tell or give some guidance as to how the flow ought to be. And by that, I'm saying even pre-pandemic, globally, there was a geopolitical thing going on that was starting to require products either being fully made in certain jurisdictions or the major components being made there and so on. And these are things, by the way, that a manufacturer, even a supply chain expert, you can't control this. But what you can do is stay very conscious of those geopolitical, economic things occurring, the policies that are being created. And that kind of then from there, you back up and then you start to do your analysis of customers, of flow, of products, of componentry. This whole notion of we want everything made in our jurisdiction. And again, you can pick on any country in the world. It's just not exclusive to anywhere. And the truth is, it's wrong. It's a wrong, excuse me, it's a wrong approach. Globalization is still here. It was here before. It's gaining momentum once again because it's the right answer. It's what you find is it matters where things are manufactured, produced, and then shipped from. But what's more important is how do we, or how can we, if we can, make products that are potentially being used globally, so that it's not that you have a universal component or a universal anything that people are going to use, whether they're in South Africa or Asia or the US or South America. But because we're human, we all kind of use similar kind of products. And so components are the same, the process is similar. That's what I think people need to look for in the next iteration of supply chain 2022.
And how would an organization protect themselves from potentially the next pandemic besides having everything in the same spot with all of your components and your customers living on the same street?
We get that question asked all the time. And there's no good one answer for any of that because the pandemic, unfortunately, has driven up a lot more barriers to international commerce and global commerce than we would have liked. I mean, you don't have to look very far. Here in the US, where different states have different requirements for different kinds of things, for participation in events, to manufacturing. So it's a terrific question. There's not a great answer currently because everything hasn't shaken out yet. But what I would say is the basic element still is customer data, customer analysis, what kind of products you have. And again, it depends on what kind of product you have as well. If your products are perishable and they have short shelf life, and then it might be a little bit wise to consider maybe we need an in-house internal in the jurisdiction of the market strategy to either make it there or produce it there or find some way to outsource it so it's closer to the end customer. It really is going to depend. I think that it goes down to the data analysis of how the market has just shifted totally globally. But here's the thing. The trick is too many companies are saying, well, what this means is stop. We're just going to make it this way now. So they've taken a very unilateral approach without looking at the much broader picture of where they were. They want to go back to normal, but the normal they're thinking isn't the normal that it's going to be. One of the things, Nicole, just in trying to level set all of this, here's the one known I have, or there's really two knowns. Is the first one is that everyone is still looking for alignment, meaning everyone, meaning every company, every organization, every entity is looking for universal alignment somehow. Whether they make something, they provide a service, they're trying to figure out how they align with partners, either business or supporting organizations or supplying organizations. They're looking for better alignment for what they do. So companies need to always remember, keep looking and driving for those organizations where they can find alignment either on the front end or on the back end or somewhere in the middle of their business process and business strategy, right? The second thing is that was lost through all of this pandemic. Companies are still looking for innovation, 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 innovation. It was a big buzzword in the early 2000, mid 2000 pandemic, kind of like it got lost in the dialogue because the innovation was solely down this narrow alleyway of we got to get out of this pandemic. But we keep counseling companies, everything we're in the world, innovation, innovation, innovation. And that can come from products, from materials, from process, from research, from design to delivery to execution. But those kind of things of alignment and innovation are the ones that businesses and companies and business leaders need to always have in the back of their mind and always drive every day to try to figure that out for themselves and for their companies.
And I like what you're saying there as far as innovation with alignment. So not innovating just to innovate, but having a purpose for that innovation. And if you align it with your customers, with your mission, with why you are in business, what you're trying to do, all of those things, then the innovation makes sense for not only organization, but also the greater good of the world.
Bingo.
If you like this video, make sure to hit like and subscribe. See you next time.